Welcome back to the workshop. So with the fairly complicated shifter system all finished up, I think something a bit simpler for the next job. Let's try and fit an exhaust. Since it is such a simple job, let's set a few design rules to make it a bit more of a challenge. So we want to incorporate two of these straight through 2-inch mufflers, two of these little silencers or hot dog mufflers, and a couple of flex joints. But I think we can overcomplicate it a little bit more than that. So probably the most important design consideration is I don't want any of the exhaust any lower than the bottom of this chassis rail. It's a rally car. It's tarmac rally, but it still gets very bumpy and we don't want to be smacking the exhaust into things. But to really overcomplicate the situation, we need to look at the placement of the two main mufflers. Now what's commonly done is to mount the mufflers laterally across the car, sort of stacked one behind the other. Similar orientation to the way a Porsche has their exhausts. But that's just a gateway drug to ending up with a tartan interior. I want to run my mufflers longitudinally out the back, something like that, the way nature intended. But before we can look at mounting any of this stuff, we need to modify these two flanges to match the Alfa manifold. So we need to modify these flanges to meet up with the Alfa manifold, and we need 78mm centre to centre on the bolts, and these are 82. There are also some weird imperial dimension, and we want M8s. So time to crank up the hole removing tool and remove these holes. So I've set the flange up in the chuck using a couple of parallels to get it square so we can face off each side. Remember to take the parallels out so they don't hit you in the face when you turn the lathe on. Alright, that's cleaned up reasonably nicely. Definitely good enough for an exhaust flange. Let's do that to the other 3 sides. Now I need to mark out the holes, need to get the orientation right. Just worked out what that angle should be and cut out a little plate to orientate the rotation. Now I'll just get the height, 74.8. Scribe the lines. Of course, getting in the way of the clamp. Now the spacing. So the diameter of this big hole is 51.6 minus the 78 centre to centre bolts we want gives us 26.4, and if we divide that by 2 we get 13.2. We'll call it 13. Mark that off. And just so we don't get a stack up of tolerances, we'll run a 78 straight off that centre punch mark. 2 exhaust manifold flanges with 78mm bolt centres, and they actually fit the Alfa manifold. Now I already know that one of these nice flexible couplings with the smooth inner, so it doesn't disrupt the exhaust flow, has to get welded directly to one of these flanges. On the other end I need a bend, but we're already running into a height issue to the chassis rail, so we need to get as much height back as possible. I've machined the inside of this flange slightly larger, and that is to suit this flexible coupling. And to gain a little bit more height back, I'm going to knock this section of the flexible coupling off on the bandsaw. When you're cutting a tube on the bandsaw like this, you've got to be really careful that the saw doesn't grab hold of the material and spin the item out of your hands. It can get a bit dangerous. So I always run a couple of vice grips, or even a whole vice if you can get one on there, just to give it something to work against. So we'll start off from the exhaust manifold and work our way to the inlet of the little mini hot dog mufflers. I've got the little mufflers mounted in pretty much the only location that they'll fit. They clear the bodywork nicely here, and they clear all the other bits and pieces that's going on. Happy with this location. The fact that this one is on an angle is causing me some internal conflict, but it makes sense. It's really the only place or orientation I could have put it. So to begin, I've created a little drop down. It'll come straight out of the manifold with a U-bend to bring it back up, and that will bolt in here, hopefully, like that. And then it's just a simple matter of So I know I skipped over a lot there, but I was working in a fairly confined space, and with all the rulers, blocks, clamps and tape I had in there to line everything up, by the time I'd put a camera in there to capture any of it, I'm pretty sure I would have been breaking social distancing rules. But don't worry, plenty more bends to come. Our next job is to get from the outlet of our mini muffler to the inlet of our main muffler. We've already got a 90-degree bend strapped to the muffler, and we need a little dog leg to come out around this chassis rail. A square set up on center line, and the straight edge across here. We need to come out with a measurement here of about 22 millimeters. Measurement here of about 4, and the width of that ruler is 26. So we need roughly 50 millimeters. It turns out that a couple of 60-degree sections will create that dog leg nicely. I've cut out a whole heap of these replicas of the bends that I'm using out of cardboard. Luckily I've got a lot of corrugated cardboard lying around. So 2 60-degree segments out of this steel donut. To help out cutting the steel donuts, I've ripped off an idea from our Lord and Saviour Nick Blackhurst and created this little saw attachment that allows me to clamp down on the donut and make some nice even cuts. I'll do one cut and then I'll spin it around. I've got some graduations marked here, spin it around to 60 and make another cut. And I've got a little fence clamped to the table just to keep everything square. 160-degree dog leg. That little clamp arrangement works very well. Even allows you to make some pretty small adjustments if you were to make a mistake. Clearly I didn't make a mistake, that was just done for demonstration purposes. So I've just spent the last 3/4 of an hour trying to square this aluminium channel up. I think I've got it in the right spot. I've clamped our little dog leg to it and I've just measured the distance from that edge to the outside of this tube. And we are 134 millimeters. So I just need a 90 and a straight section with a total length of 134 millimeters. I could have got all fancy and twisted this around and added a bend in here, but I'm trying to get as much length out of this section of the exhaust as possible to match the length of the other bank, which travels all the way under the engine. And I took a quick measurement with some string lines last night, and I think it's going to be very close. So it turns out our distance of 134 millimeters was spot on, and that's fitted in there very nicely. And the height of this 90 matched up perfectly with the height of this 90, so I didn't have to add a spacer ring or anything in there, and that was completely planned and totally not a fluke at all. So now all I have to do is something very similar on the other side of the car, and then we can think about welding the thing up. So the second side has come up equally as nice. I've also revisited this area. I decided I wasn't happy with the clearance between this part of the exhaust and the aluminium foot there, so I've added another little bend to knock that over by 8 degrees, and now I'm much more happy with the position. Now I was just going to go around and replace all the masking tape with this high temp aluminium tape, but I think it might work a little bit better if I just weld it. So it's pretty obvious I haven't been tacking all the tubes together as I've been going, just holding it together with masking tape. I did this for a couple of reasons. The first is I want to give all the tubes a really good clean up, both inside and out, before I weld them. But the main reason is that with all the clearances being very small that we're working with, I want to weld each section individually and then check it and sort of course correct as I go. If I was to tack it all together, take it onto the bench and then weld it all up, there's no way everything would stay in the same position as we need it. I've never tried this before, but I'm going to see how cleaning up all the tubes inside and out in the sandblaster goes. So I find a butt joint on a tube is one of the harder joints to get a really good looking weld. Easy enough to get a functional weld, but hard to get an even weld all the way around. A butt joint at anything is tricky to weld because there's nothing holding the weld pool into place, so it can just sort of walk around all over the joint. On a tube it makes it even more tricky because you constantly have to adjust the angle of your torch as you come around the circumference of the tube. To try and help me get a half decent weld, I've made up a little tube clamp. It allows me to clamp the tube and then quickly just spin it around and index it and just help me position everything nicely.
Welded it to a bit of RHS so that I can move it around and hang it off the bench if I need to. Don't know if I've made it long enough, a little bit concerned about that. All right, let's tack these tubes together. Well, they've come out all right, not too uneven, but they are very hot. So just to be safe, going to leave them here for a couple of minutes. Perfect timing. I finished my beer and they had cooled down sufficiently. Everything's looking good. So this is the next joint I'm going to tackle. Do a few marks. And then take it back to the bench and weld it up. Looking good so far. One last joint to do, fairly critical, so I'm going to tack it in position. One side done. Now it's just Control C, Control V on the other side. Right, there it is, all welded up. Did a quick string line check while I've got it on the bench, and to be honest, I can't tell the difference in length between the two. They are pretty much exactly the same. Hard to see what all the fuss is about when it's sitting on the bench. Just a couple of bends thrown together. Anyway, one last check. Let's throw it back in the car and make sure nothing's moved. Yay! It still fits. All welded up. Very happy with the results. Clearance is good. Well, I think as good as could have been achievable given the small amount of space we had to work with. All the components we wanted have been packaged. Got some really good ground clearance. And I didn't even cheat on any of the bends. No sneaky angles in there. All the cuts are on center line, so should be a nice easy ride for all the exhaust on their way out to the atmosphere. The overall exhaust isn't finished yet. Still need to add some sockets for some O2 sensors, and clearly those MDF brackets aren't going to be much good, so we need to properly hang the system. But for now, so I think that'll have to do for this episode. Just want to say hi to all the people who've subscribed to the channel over the week. Got a massive boost in numbers, and that's thanks to Jeff from Home Built, another car YouTube channel. He's currently putting a Ferrari engine into an Alfa 105. So I set him up a couple of my wheel bearing spacers because I thought they might help out. And he's also been referring back to an older video I did where I put a steering rack into the 105 rally car. He needs to do something similar to package everything around this crazy engine swap. So massive thanks to Jeff for the big shout out. Also, big thanks to Barry for sending me a first aid kit. Much appreciated. They're already in the fridge. So yeah, welcome to the channel. Let me know what you like. Hope you enjoy the rest of the car build, and remember there's always time for a safety beer. Cheers.